Before we get into punctuating clauses, we're going to do a quick review of what a dependent clause and an independent clause is. So just to kind of jog your memory, you have to remember that a dependent clause is something that cannot stand alone by itself, meaning that it is not a complete sentence. However, on the other hand, an independent clause is a complete sentence, and it is something that can stand alone completely on its own. So now that we know what our clauses are, and we know that we can find both an independent and a dependent clause in the same sentence, it is important to also know that depending on the order of how our clauses are coming in a sentence, they require different punctuation. So we're going to start with what happens when we have a dependent clause that comes before an independent clause. So what happens here is many dependent clauses will need to be separated by a comma if it comes before an independent clause. So if we take a look at our example, after I went to the store, there we have a dependent clause. It is coming before our independent clause, I decided to go to a friend's house. What happens is if we have our dependent clause that comes before our independent clause, we need to separate them with a comma. So we would need to say, after I went to the store, comma, I decided to go to a friend's house. So again, anytime you see a dependent clause coming before an independent clause, you always need to have that comma there. So on this slide, we have the opposite situation. So if a dependent clause is coming after an independent clause, there will not be any punctuation. So we actually pretty much have the exact same sentence in our first example, except the clauses are switched. I decided to go to my friend's house after I went to the store. Anytime the dependent clause is coming after the independent clause, there is no need for any punctuation, so there will not be a comma. So always remember, if the dependent clause is coming first, you will always put the comma. If the dependent clause is coming second, there is no comma. So this is a really easy way to remember how to punctuate your clauses. So always remember, I before D means that there is never a comma between the two clauses, and D before I means that there is always a comma between the two clauses. I before D, no comma. D before I, put a comma. There is something called the introduction comma, and this is used when you have an introductory element to a sentence. That means that you might be starting off the sentence with an introduction to an idea, or you might be starting a sentence off with a transition word. Transition words could be anything like first, second, next, then, also, however, therefore. Those are all examples of transition words. And anytime you start a sentence with a transition word, you need to put a comma directly after it. This also is the same for introductory ideas. So if you say something like, over the weekend, I will go skiing, over the weekend is your introductory element to that sentence. Anytime you're starting with an introductory element, you have to have a comma directly after it. Another example of an introductory element might be something like, feeling anxious, settlers stock up on supplies before winter. Feeling anxious is our introductory idea to the sentence. You might have an introductory idea to a sentence as simple as saying, tomorrow I will go to school. Tomorrow would be your introductory element to that sentence. So always remember, whether it's an introductory element, like a transition word, or it's an introduction to an idea, you always have to put a comma directly afterward. You will need to complete this practice activity, write down your answers on a separate sheet of paper, and bring them back with you to class tomorrow. So what you will need to do is read each sentence and determine if the sentence is correct or incorrect. If the sentence is correct, write a C on your piece of paper for correct. If the sentence is incorrect, rewrite the sentence on your paper with making the correction to the sentence.